This is Have You Met? My guest today is a world-renowned horticulturalist and plant hunter. In the year 2000, while hunting for rare orchids in the dangerous Darien Gap in South America, he and his travel companion were held up at gunpoint and kidnapped. They were held captive for the next 9 months. They didn't know who had kidnapped them, why they did it, or if there was any chance of their survival. We talk in detail about the unbelievable ordeal that they had to suffer through, and my guest recalls some of his memories of it. He says talking about it feels like therapy to him. Have you met Tom Hart Dyke? So, Tom, tell me how you first fell in love with plants.
Well, Ben, it was a summer's day, 1979. I was just 3 years of age, and my granny, my inspirational botanical granny, gave me a packet of carrot seeds and a trowel, and I've never looked back. She was my best friend, 2 generations older, 60 plus years older. Some friends at school found that quite weird that your granny was dropping you off at school, but she was just such an inspiration to me and just turned to me and said, Tom, here's your carrot seeds and a trowel. Get your hands dirty. If you don't lose plants, you haven't learnt anything. And off you go. And I've stuck to that rule ever since the age of 3 and never looked back. And that's just me, like Granny was, a self-taught botanical entity, a fantastic person.
Wow. So carrots, that was where it all began. Carrots.
I know
Granny.
carrots. Yeah, they're not like rare orchids from Costa Rica or Colombia, but you've got to start somewhere, Ben.
Exactly.
You've got to start somewhere.
Exactly. So how did they go? The first batch. Did you grow them? Did they all die or how?
Disaster. Total and utter disaster. Not one grew, and I had to go and get the carrots from the supermarket in the summer because nothing happened. Total disaster. But it was that inspiration. And Granny, she died over 10 years ago now. She was nearly 96 before she died. And in everything she did, she was inspiring, whether it was botanical painting, great old painter. It's fantastic. Whether it was in the garden, the more storms and hail and snow, the better. The more she was out there, that just toughness and enthusiasm. And for riding bikes, she stopped riding her mountain bike at 95.
No way.
Yeah, and it was stuck in 6th gear for the last 5 years of her life. I mean, and we're talking hills around Kent, where we are now. I mean, we're talking hilly. She was amazing. And that, in every aspect, was my inspiration. But unusual relationship, people did find that quite strange, that it wasn't a friend you might meet at something called a pub or your sister or parents. It was a generation or 2 above me. But fantastic person.
Kindred spirits, I suppose.
Absolutely. And just Sue, her enthusiasm for the world of plants in every single aspect. Well, my red blood cells were turning green instantly. I mean, she really inspired me.
So where did you go from the carrots, the failed carrots? Like, so was it immediately after that you're asking Granny for more seeds, or is she kind of she's slipping you more seeds under the table and saying go and have a go with these ones? Where did you go from there?
You pretty much got it. So it was violet, it was pansies, it was delphiniums, it was anyway a lot of seeds that she was giving me. Lots of packets of seeds. I had my little vegetable plot, that 6 foot by 6 foot, which then expanded to more ornamental plants. And it was from that point onwards that I realized I love the edibles and the medicinal plants. Yet they're fantastic, but it is the ornamental aspect that really does get me going, I have to say. And seeing fantastic, sometimes gaudy to look at, bright pink psychedelic things in flower is my actual, that's what really flicks my horticultural switch, if you like. I mean, that was just brilliant. And through the carrot seeds to growing ornamental plants, then to a serious border on the south facing wall, which is the best aspect you can have in the northern hemisphere anyway. In the southern hemisphere, it's the north facing wall. That's the sunniest, and that's where you can grow a whole wide range of different plants. And it led from there. And I think the next step for me with Granny was doing these small trips, whether it was to a local nature reserve in Kent or southeast England somewhere, or whether it was going to a garden centre, a specialist nursery, whatever it was, just seeing the world of plants. In the UK, we've got, in Europe generally, but in the UK in particular, such a wonderful access to the most amazing, diverse selection of native but also exotic plants for sale, whether it's garden centres, nurseries, superstores, whatever it is. And the world, quite literally, is your oyster. So that platform was building and building and building until then, finally, for me, the trips abroad started to develop as a teenager. But that real inspiration through Granny and at the age of 10 and 11 to have a 9-foot long, 10-foot high, and 8-foot wide lean-to glass house. Oh, God, Ben. I mean, that was me. It was me. It was a sweet shop. That was my sweet shop. I have a few friends, but not that many. They can't put up with all this. And it's just, you just immerse yourself, kept in frost-free conditions with a 2-kilowatt Parwin fan heater, about 4 or 5 degrees above freezing. You can grow whatever you want. And it was seeing these plants in the greenhouse from all over the world that led me to think, itchy feet time. What's it like to see these rare orchids, Cape primroses, actually in the wild of wherever it may be? And that's what really started to make me think at the age of 17, 18, food granny, the gardening outside and the greenhouse, that next big step of going abroad to see plants in the wild.
Wow. And we'll get to that in just a second. I mean, I have to confess that I also was a big lover as a child. I was going to the garden centre and like the smells and all the colours, and it was a lot of fun. When you were kind of, that 10, 11 age, you said you had that amazing greenhouse or glass house. And I'm just interested to know kind of what your friends and stuff, kind of how was that at school? And like, because obviously kids can be mean and things like that. And obviously you kind of, if you don't follow a very strict route of like, being a tough kid and playing whatever sport, and then things might not be so easy. And I'm just interested to know, what were the other kids' thoughts on your obsession and love for plants? Like, did they give you kind of a hard time about that, or what was that?
You would think so, especially with flowers, and plants. I was into flowers and plants since he was 3. You'd think you'd be picked on. The opposite. They thought I was a complete freak show. It's like the flower man. There's obviously a problem, which is completely accurate, and we're not going near him. I was never bullied once, and there wasn't actually the chance to be bullied, because during any type of break time, during a day at school, whatever school it was, I was in the ground searching for orchids and other plants anyway, so they couldn't find me. I was always out of bounds searching for orchids, but I was in more trouble than any other pupil at school or student at college. For not attending lessons was an issue, but also for always going out of bounds. I was in more trouble than anyone else for doing, and they were doing all sorts of other things that you do at school. For me, it was just going out of bounds in the grounds. I got always stood by the alarm buzzer there that sounded the brakes next to the headmaster's office, standing there and staring at the wall for most of the day, actually. Always in trouble. But it was that passion, and you can't, it's in you, it's there, and it always will be. And Granny's fault entirely. The whole thing is Granny's fault.
I guess when it's so ingrained, nobody can really make fun of you for it, because even if they try, like, kids, they're going to say, "Oh, you love flowers, don't you?" And you're going to be like, "Yes, I do. Absolutely. I love flowers."
Absolutely. And they did try. I mean, bless them. I say bless them, that sounds a bit strange, but they really tried to sort of egg me on, and, "Oh, he's a gay lord," and that's a great, and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, fine, I'm going out to look at flowers. I was sort of beyond, I wasn't even paying any attention, and they couldn't get the rise out of me. So therefore, move on to somebody else who will fall for it or react or something. And that, I have to say, that stood me in very good stead over the years. That sort of, I don't care, and just be yourself, be who you are, and don't react to things that might egg you on. That saved my life in later years. Yes,
I'm looking forward to getting to
that. But no, at the end of the day, it's gone. I think friends away from school, I've met other ways. I don't know, sports class or play. I love playing badminton. Badminton, fantastic racket sport. And even then, they do stick with me, and they do. But especially recently, it's been such a passion with developing what we're doing here now. And it's just ingrained in you, so you tunnel vision out completely. I mean, you're in the greenhouse for so much of the time, and if they haven't got that shared passion or enthusiasm, even if they have for another subject, but say if it isn't plants, friends do just have to just turn up and find me, because they know I'm not going to be on this phone. Mobiles and Tom, I hope, not compatible. I'm always losing it, or batteries off, or batteries failed or something. But planting it's just that thing. Yeah, exactly. It might take root. That's it. But I just love it, and I know people who have that, whether it might be politics or whether they have a set circle of friends, often who are into the same subject, because people not only necessarily understand how involved you are in it, but end up just giving up with you anyway. So, but wouldn't take a second back of my life. Wouldn't take a second back.
It's a real blessing to find like something you're so passionate about, and something that, you love and are able to spend your time doing. There's not many people are so lucky. It's a really, wonderful thing that you found there. I love your passion. It comes through straight away. So your first plant hunting trips, you said it's like when you were a teenager, you started to kind of go abroad. Before you tell me about that, I mentioned to you earlier about these kind of historic like orchid hunters and things like that a few hundred years ago, where it was like this kind of dangerous and well-known, well-respected, and it just seemed very cool. It seems like something out of an old, Hollywood film or something. They probably should make one about an old orchid hunter. I don't know, but just tell me a little bit about if there were any names of people that you knew of, you were aware of, you aspired to kind of, be like in a way. Just anything on that front, really.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was Granny who really got me inspired with the plant hunting idea. Going into early teenage years, she sort of started to introduce it to me because it's quite a complex subject, what people did and are still are doing, bringing back plants to our shores and all over the world for whether it's ornamental reasons because the flower looks pretty or the leaves, etc., or whether it's for more often now ethnobotanical things, so cures for various cancers and cures for various other ailments, etc. So plant hunting still continues to this day, but as you rightly say, it was back in the day that it was its heyday. So from the 1770s onwards was a huge point in plant hunting circles, and that was the dawn of a place called Kew Gardens in West London. The most famous botanical institute on the planet was founded with the royal family at the time, then entirely on plant hunters. Kew Gardens would not exist without plant hunters. That's what it was founded on when they paid the first professional plant hunter to go abroad, a Scotsman from Aberdeen, actually, called Francis Masson, to go to South Africa in the 1770s. He brought back something called the bird of paradise, Strelitzia, which is quite well known still to this day as a popular house plant, and Azanthodecia or white arum lily, lovely glistening white, curved, supple flowers, gorgeous thing, still as popular today as it was 250 odd years ago. So Granny used to tell me these stories, but to answer your question fully, there was one person who really stood out, the most prolific plant hunter to date and will ever have been, to the 7 expeditions he made to southwestern China, a chap called George Forrest. And it was something about him, his character, stubborn, wouldn't give up, passionate, determined, and absolutely hell-bent on finding rare species of plant. Orchids, whether it was a rare orchid, whether it was a rare primula, a type of primrose, a shrub, a tree, whatever it might be. For those 7 trips that he made to southwest China, it got caught in a bamboo trap. It was like a man trap, bamboo going straight through, a pierced bamboo, right through the bottom of his foot, shot at. It was quite short, actually. So 2 times he was shot, they went straight through the bullets through his hat instead of his head, because he was quite a short chap running around in the undergrowth from warring factions in southwestern China. I mean, as a 13-year-old, this was the Indiana Jones equivalent to me, and better. I mean, this was fantastic. So there was no doubt that gave me that thing of, well, I don't see myself as a plant hunter compared to the good old days, if you like, of the real, when it really took off back in the 1770s. I've brought back a few things over the years, but there was that link to proving that modern day plant hunting still continues to this day, which it does, albeit in a smaller way. And that just egged me on. I love plants, as you can tell, but that plant hunting background of you are going in the footsteps of people from 1770 to places that no human being has been to, and you are now back in the day, 1998, but I could be now, here we are, beginning of March 2022, there are still places no humans have been to on this earth where plants are still being discovered. So yes, that linked in it nicely, and you throw Granny into that as well, that mix, and you just had the itchiest feet known to man.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I like I said, I was reading a little bit about those guys. I came across, I think, Francis Masson and the stories they must have had, and like the experiences are just unbelievable. Doing kind of these backpacking, as if you want to say backpacking, in like areas completely, like you say, untouched. But 200 years ago, 300 years ago, when it was just a different world. And like, I guess some of them, didn't they discover like thousands of new species and things like that?
They certainly did. Yeah.
Never happen anymore, would it? Right? Or at least I can't imagine somebody discovering that many, because they've all, not all of them, but a lot of them have been discovered, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, everything they were virtually seeing was new. I mean, everything they walked into. I mean, he went to the Cape into South Africa, one of his main trips, to see the white harum lily, as I said, the bird of paradise. But he introduced just hundreds and hundreds of plants. Whatever he saw was sort of new. I think he was trying to, Francis Masson, I'm talking about, the first professional plant hunter employed by Kew, i.e. paid to go abroad with that specific mission of bringing back ornamental plants back to the British shores. And what was so interesting to me is he must have had to try and say, oh, I can't have that one because perhaps the flowers aren't as nice perhaps to grow in people's gardens. Have that one. Everything he saw was new to him then. So, I mean, he may have heard some stories about some of the plants in that area, but he was the first professional plant hunter to go abroad. So in that region, the first ever plant hunter from abroad, it was no one had been there. And he must have just been spoilt for choice. As you say, and 250 years ago, the transport, a lot of plant hunters died before they even got to their destination. So many, I mean, the ships they were going on, it took months to get anywhere, as now you get on a flight and it takes an hour and a half to get to wherever. I mean, we're so spoilt nowadays, I have to say. Our world really is your oyster, and you can really get to so many wonderful places so much easier. But as I say, some of them never actually survived the trip, let alone getting back, and let alone when you're actually there. A lot of the natives in particular weren't particularly pleased to see you, or were very suspicious of what, tried to explain what I could imagine. I've had that over the years, explaining what you're doing. You're not you're not a spy, you're not a this and that. You are just looking for plants. And it's a hard one to convince people. So plant hunters were just shocked because they didn't believe them.
Yeah, and they came across cannibals and all sorts of things, didn't they? And there was all sorts of competition between plant hunters as well, right? Where some people would be instructed to like try and urinate on another plant hunter's plants to kill them before they got like. It's a wild. It's like the Wild West, basically. There's this
it was crazy
business.
Oh, yeah. the urination, or the burning them. Just dispose of them, throwing them down a river so they wouldn't, and they'd strip a forest if it was quite a rare, orchids in particular. People were getting, especially the Victorian era, about the 1860s, that kind of thing. People were getting fanatical about the latest orchid that was being introduced, these lovely, blousy looking, fantastically gaudy flowers from, say, Central America, actually in particular. And if a plant hunter realized and knew, so many were going out there, being paid a fortune to do this. And the orchids that were being sold, the equivalent today of millions of pounds to various growers and various aristocratic landowners in the UK. It was a huge business. And if this particular orchid, there's quite a few examples of this and stories I've been hearing, was quite rare to, or endemic perhaps, to just a small area, so i.e. grows there and nowhere else in the world, perhaps a mountaintop, a valley, a ravine, say in Costa Rica, in Guatemala. As you rightly say, the plant hunter that was there first would take the orchid, a few spares just in case, get the locals, his guides, etc., to strip the trees and burn the lot. So you'd often make a plant completely extinct before they'd even named it or introduced it, just because they were so competitive. They didn't want their competitor to have the edge, or get on the ship, get the orchid, get on the ship first and get back to the UK and try and undercut them. Yeah, there was a couple of stories of people actually being killed. I mean, plant hunters killing a plant hunter, especially in Central America, because the orchids there are absolutely sensational. And that's where they were being sent off by these very rich nurseries in the UK to collect. So it's a real, and all this, growing up with all these stories, you really felt like you were, doing something, embarking on something very, very special. And a slight element of danger. There's a hint of danger. Yeah,
definitely. No, it's a rich history, and for the record, you said it's still a thing, like modern plant hunting, orchid hunting. Well, on the Wikipedia page, I can't remember it's either if it's orchid hunting or plant hunting, but it's got a subheading for modern orchid hunters or plant hunters, and your name is, you're there at the start. You start the paragraph, Tom. So,
well, this is it, Ben. Come
on. So tell me. Let's move on and tell me about some of your first trips abroad then, and how that happened, where you went, and just how that whole experience was.
I think for me, the first trip that really stands in mind, there's a couple of local trips. I did an exchange student trip to southern France, actually, which was great,
Oh, cool.
Toulouse, and it was great fun. And but actual plant hunting trip, the first I ever did was cycling from here to Lisbon. So that's about 1,800 miles on a push bike, except for the English Channel, I hasten to add. So I got the ferry for that, but otherwise it was just from Sangatte through Calais and right across France, across the Pyrenees. God, they're quite high, the Pyrenees, aren't they? On a bush bike and down through Spain, the Basque Country, fantastic, and across down to Portugal, seeing lots of plants along the way. No specific plan apart from to try and complete the mission for Cancer Research UK. And beyond that, it was just seeing plants in the wild, admittedly, mostly by the roadside. I couldn't start digressing into the middle of the woods and wherever it was in France. The Bordeaux region, particularly interesting, and Birix, there were some fantastic orchids there. I was going in May, June, so a brilliant time to see these plants. Just giving me the flavour, a good cause to cycle for, fantastic exercise, great adventure. And there's something about being on a bike. I mean, you are so vulnerable as opposed to being on public transport in your own car. You are vulnerable to a huge lorry going by, the wind, flat tires, a stone in the road. Yet there's something about it. It added to the whole trip, that sense of the chances of me completing it were reasonably low. It was like 16, 17 at the time. And to do it in 2 weeks, 3 days, 4 hours and 21 minutes, I was really pleased with. That excludes the ferry crossing. And it was just absolutely brilliant. That sense of adventure, the vulnerability of it to a degree, the small chance of completing it. It was one way, I should add. I got the flight back from Lisbon, but that was a real boost for me that led to a couple of family trips to South Africa, which was great, but they were family trips. It was really on November the 16th, 1997 at Terminal 3, London Heathrow, at the age of just turned 21, that my life changed when I thought, yeah, let's do a trip, a 2-year trip backpacking abroad to Southeast Asia and Australia. It was that trip that consolidated my thought of I wanted a trip that was going to be long lasting, thought-provoking, meaningful. I had grants of about £2,500 to study in Southeast Asia and Australia. So you weren't just, you gave me a vindication of what I was doing, rather than backpacking around. Oh, aren't those flowers great? Oh, it's lovely to see plants in the wild to improve your husbandry back home in my small little greenhouse. That was wonderful. Oh, that's what I've got to do. I've got it in the wrong soil. Oh, it's growing on a rock, that orchid, not in the ground. Just seeing God's inspiration of actually these plants where they're growing in the wild. You can't teach that any other way through the internet, books, actually being there. Wow, your husbandry goes through the roof. The improvement to your husbandry of cultivating these plants much better back at home. But it was that vindication of having grants to do this, studying on the Mentawai Islands off the coast of Sumatra, which was absolutely fantastic. The island of Siberut. That was for 4 months with the Finnish Scott Foundation. Not collecting orchids, that's legally now very restricted, but it was just seeing plants in the wild to improve my cultivation back home. And a whole year going to every country in Southeast Asia, except for Vietnam. I couldn't get the visa to get to Vietnam, but it was often traveling with people as I went, mostly on my own, which is starting to gather now. I think you probably get the idea that people do find it a struggle to travel with me for too long. I never stopped talking, but it was just eye-opening. It's just an understatement of the century. I mean, it was the most fabulous trip. Nothing went wrong. And China, they tried their best to pocket me without success. And I just got buoyed by that. There was a sense of invincibility. It was fatal almost, really. But there was that sense of, I travelled for almost exactly a year, and now it's off to Australia for another year. What could go wrong? I was very intrepid before leave. I was very thinking, this is going to be fantastic and it's going to be brilliant. But then those doubts start to come in. I'm basically on my own. My home is my rucksack. My 2 feet are mostly my transport. Yes, local transport occasionally, but it really, you are on your own. You meet fellow backpackers, but it was the most extraordinary time seeing the world's largest flower something called Rafflesia arnoldii in Sumatra. It's a parasitic plant growing out of the ground. It parasitizes a climber called a tetrastigma vine, and it unpeels itself it's like a sort of white plain football, is that sort of size, and then it just inflates itself and palms out, sort of opens out into this meaty coloured, horrific smelling thing. Makes your eyes water. It's so stench ridden, smelling of rotting flesh, to encourage all the bot flies and various other flies, carrion flies that like that sort of smell, which are the pollinators. And seeing plants that I'd grown up with, even at Kew they can't cultivate this plant, it's so difficult, was fabulous. Orangutans in Sumatra, the Sumatran rhino was, well, that was not expected. That's almost extinct now. So it was an extraordinary experience being with the natives for weeks on end in the middle of nowhere. I just total and utter escapism. It was fabulous.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
What was the question again, Bal?
I don't even know.
I've totally gone off on one, but
it was perfect.
It was, the immersion of it was superlative.
Yeah. So, did you stay with any like indigenous tribes or anything when you were, or indigenous people when you were traveling around by yourself?
Yes, I think mostly it's you're a tourist. You're not in your own country. You're a tourist, Ben. So for the short times I did 1 or 2 weeks, perhaps, it wasn't exactly, nothing was a sort of package tour, really. I got on a flight and left, and with an open ticket for 2 years later. That was pretty much the plan. But in between that, yes, you sign up for a week to go and see the locals, and you go on a whitewater bamboo raft in North Thailand. And that was all fun. Throughout the trip, I would do that to immerse yourself a little bit. But to me, it was being with the local population in Siberut, the Mentawai Islands, for that, quarter of a year to just over. I saw 2 Norwegians, and that was it the whole time. That was searching for orchids with this grant that I had through the Finnish Scott Foundation of about 500 quid. It was superb, and it was just the most amazing, awe-inspiring experience. The orchids were almost a side issue. Why I was there, the flowers, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but just to see how people live and appreciate their culture and immerse yourself. You can't do it for a week on a whitewater rafting on a bamboo raft or whatever in Thailand. Actually doing it for that period of time. It's only 3 months. I mean, obviously a year or two, you'd be absolutely like a native. But it was still so immersive and such a pleasure. They were such lovely people, and a guy called Corny, he was my guide, and he stuck with me the whole time. Yeah, he was paid, but I gave him the money for helping, but not much. And he was if he was in this country, he'd be your best friend. It's an extraordinary chap, and showed me that the shamanism angles of it. I didn't get involved in a lot of the I just was I don't know, on the edge when they were doing all this in their umas, which are their longhouses. The shamanism, honestly, the shamans were amazing. Get into a frenzy to speak to the spirits and their god, and it was an extraordinary experience. The food, the culture, it was fabulous. They didn't have rice there. They had this thing called a sago or sago palm, which is it's a starch substitute, basically. Tastes a cross between sort of potato, rice, and something else. It's quite weird tasting, and they would literally just scalp like a soft pith in the center of these trunks, scalp out all the inside of this sago palm, and that is their staple diet. That and pigs and a bit of beef, a few cows. But it was the most picturesque, gorgeous scene and everything, but being immersed in that culture was of the Mentawai people. It was fabulous.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound amazing. When the shamans and stuff were doing their thing and everything was getting spiritual, did you feel anything? Like, did you kind of sense that? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, was there anything? I don't know. I can't seem to put my words on how to ask this question, but yeah, did you sense any kind of spiritual things going on around you there, or just obviously you respected what they were doing, but did you feel anything or nothing?
Yeah, absolutely. They did feel quite a lot. They were their concoctions that they were drinking to get into that world. And obviously, I wasn't a local. I wasn't in that zone. I wasn't in that moment. But their reaction to it and the aura around it really, you couldn't help but somehow be involved in it. You really felt like I didn't see anything, I didn't witness anything coming out of the skies, or the gifts that they were offering, the sacrifices of the birds they were handing to their gods. I didn't see like they'd actually float this thing floating into the sky. And but you definitely got a sense of something going on. I was just drinking tap water, actually, or pond water, actually, because there weren't any taps there. So I was very much just, I drink a bit occasionally, but no, just the tap water, the pond water for me, and just staring at these people, appreciating their culture. But there was something there, Ben. Oh, yeah, there was definitely, I'm not just saying that because of the experience that was there and what they were seeing and doing. You felt something, and it made it so powerful. You know, I forgot why I was there. The orchids, it really unusual for me, really taken out of that zone of the botanical zone into the ethnobotanical zone, the human zone, and the link with plants spiritually, medicinally. They always got a use for the plant. If an orchid was known and they knew what an orchid was, it's because it had a medicinal use. They don't go in for the ornamental things. They have to survive in these places. Yeah. Plants are useful. That's how they understand it. And they couldn't understand why people would pay so much to look at a plant when it comes into flower on their windowsill and not eat it. They couldn't understand that. And I totally get it. I totally understand why. But it was a fabulous, the Mental Iron Islands, superb place. It really was.
Yeah. And I'm assuming they accepted you like one of their own, basically, and kind of looked after you, took you under their wing. Did you have any disagreements with any of them, or?
No, I think the disagreements tended to be with, do we have to walk again, Tom, back into the rainforest and look for this orchid? I told you it's not there. You keep insisting it's there. It's usually right, actually, Ben. They only said it wasn't there because they didn't want to do it. They said, Tom, I'm feeling lazy. And he's brilliant, fantastic English. I mean, it was brilliant. And they just got bored of me in the end, I've got to say, which is a pattern in my life. To put up with me for a quarter of a year is astonishing behaviour. Amazing.
Before we move on, I mean, it sounds amazing. Before we move on, I'd be remiss if I didn't just ask you briefly, because you mentioned some amazing animals there as well, like the orangutan and the Sumatran rhino. Did you have any kind of encounters or experiences with animals that were particularly memorable, or was it just a case of you just kind of got some amazing, got to see them in their habitat? But was there anything that you really remember that happened?
I think the biggest for the fauna for me in Indonesia, I mean, wherever you were in the middle of a city, in the middle of it was there. The monkeys come to the city. I mean, it's an extraordinary place, Indonesia, with its 17,500 islands or whatever it is. I mean, it's an amazing place. I have to say, the Sumatran rhino is picked by the orangutans. I mean, they really look at you. And it's not going past you or looking over your shoulder. They look you in the eyes, Ben. And it was an extraordinary experience. I did it twice, actually, in Sumatra. And then the most famous orangutan sanctuary, actually, is in North Borneo, in the Malaysian bit, in the state of Sabah. And it was fabulous seeing them. Yes, they weren't in cages. They were cultivated, if you like. I wouldn't say actually in captivity either. They had the whole forest themselves. There were no fences, there were no cages, but they would come to where they knew if they couldn't find a food source for themselves, where the humans were providing the food source. So it was a mixture of a tamed wild effect, and they needed the tourists to fund all their wonderful exploits that they were doing, these fantastic reserves and the staff there. So if there are no orangutans, people can't see the orangutans, we're not going to get the visitors coming, the tourists coming. So there was that balancing act that they had to achieve, and they achieved it superbly. But there's something, the orangutan just looking at you and just, he sussed you out. He or she has sussed you out. They just have that acknowledgement. And we can see him. He's pretty harmless. He probably likes flowers. He'd be all right. I mean, they're very, very clever. Just that eye contact, and they soon get bored. Right, I'm off to eat something now, or pick nits out of my cousin's head or something, And it was, and that orange hair, sometimes, especially in the older degeneration with a much darker flattened face that starts to appear and almost morphologically starts to spread as they get a bit older, and that wise old orangutans. It was a spiritual experience, almost fabulous.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, a few weeks ago I spoke to a primatologist, and yeah, he told me some of his like encounters in the wild with different primates, like chimpanzees and others. But yeah, it was amazing. Okay, so I could talk about that for ages. There's probably loads we didn't touch on in terms of you living with the the indigenous people and that kind of thing. But let's move on. I'm conscious of the time. Let's move on to how you went from there to starting to think about going out to South America and Columbia, Panama, the Darien Gap ultimately. So yeah, how did that all come about? How did that get onto your radar, and how did you make it happen?
Oh, it shivers down my spine, you even talking about the next chapter. I still can't believe it. It was me or my friend. But before Central America, a year in Australia, I'll summarize this. There's a lot to get through. But basically, Australia was just fabulous. I love eucalyptus tree. We've got the national collection here, one of only 3 in the UK. And
you were the first one to make one flower, weren't you? One of these amazing types of eucalyptus. I saw a picture of it.
That's it. That was from Western Australia, the Silver Princess, it was called.
Yeah.
After it flowered, it died to kill the story off. I don't know, after all that. But yes, I was the first to flower and then kill it straight away. But yeah, and I introduced so many different eucalyptus trees. The most prolific plant hunting expedition for me was Australia. In particular, Australia's only island state, Tasmania. I had 4 months there, mostly backpacking, hitchhiking, walking most of the UNESCO World Heritage Site that is Tasmania, and brought back over 140 different types of plant in seed form. I was sending back in these old camera film cases. You can't get those anymore, can you? Or I suppose contact lens case equivalent, those camera film cases, sending them all back to mum, because I was still a long way to go in my trip in Australia, not knowing what was going to happen next. I had no clue really what I was going to do next. But Tasmania was fabulous. I bought this 2-man, $28 it cost me, Aussie dollars, so I don't know, £10 or something. This 2-man tent that was to be used a lot in the coming months. But it was a fabulous, fabulous trip, and my most prolific plant hunting trip. With the permits, I had permits to collect, quite restricted now. So lots of permits, and all these seeds were being sent back home to mum, these camera film cases full of seed to be stored in the fridge. So if they kept at about 4 or 5 degrees or less if preferable, they will last 60, 70 years, the viability of this seed. Like dust, wow. Ben. Eucalyptus seed is like dust. So, and whereas at room temperature, it lasts 2 or 3 years at most, and that's it. So mum, or poor dad, when I eventually got back home, the fridge was full of these seed cases. And dad was like, I can't get any food in there because you've got all these ridiculous seeds. He didn't understand that at all. So it was an amazing experience. I'm jumping the gun a bit, but it was a fantastic experience. And then it was just an innocent flight back via Sydney International Airport, Tokyo for a 2 or 3 day stopover, and Narita. I didn't see any of Japan at all, just the airport surrounds really. And then I just thought a little innocent stopover in San Francisco. I'd never been to Western United States, and the key thing for me was seeing 2 giants of the plant world. Well, they are the largest single living organism in the world, the Sequoiadendron giganteum, which is the giant redwood, and that's in Yosemite National Park in California, and the tallest tree in the world, its cousin a few hundred miles away on the Pacific Northwest coast, the coastal redwood, and that is Sequoia sempervirens. And I saw the tallest tree in the world, and I saw the largest tree. And it isn't a botanical experience, Ben. It is not a plant experience in a way to me. It is an out-of-body spiritual experience. Seeing these, you feel so small and you feel so humbled and insignificant when you stand next to these things that weigh hundreds of tons and tower 113 meters into the sky. It's an extraordinary experience, and I never got my connecting flight back home. I just was so absorbed by the States, and I traveled further south, and I think my parents were thinking, when's he coming home? This was now October 1999, so nearly 2 whole years of traveling and without going home. I only phoned my parents twice in 2 years. Really bad. I love my parents. They're fantastic. I love Granny and my sister, but it was my escapism.
Yeah.
And my parents totally understand, but some parents might find that quite hard to deal with. But it was just the way it was. And I traveled further south to, I'll never forget it, to Arizona, to the Botanic Gardens there, which were fabulous, in Tucson. And then to see those John Wayne style saguaro cacti, or saguaro is actually how you say it, these amazing branched cacti. They're so stereotypical, that part of the world. Seeing forests of them was just sensational. And then to cross the border, and never forget it, into Mexico to go to the Copper Canyon, 10 times the size of the Grand Canyon, but not quite as spectacular to look at, so it's not often talked about. And that's where I met this chap, November 1999, called Paul Winder, who completely and utterly changed my life in November 1999. He was a backpacker like me, more into his mountains than plants, but we bonded instantly, fatefully, you might say. And he introduced me, he made me familiar with, I'd heard about this region called the Darien Gap, on the Panamanian-Colombian border. It straddles the border, the only break in the Pan American Highway for 17,500 miles from Alaska, pretty much, to the bottom of Tierra del Fuego, Chile, Argentina, a continuous strip of asphalt, except for this gap. What is it, about 100 plus kilometers, where it's just tropical rainforest. And I looked it up on the internet, and all I saw was orchids. And I just thought, what would it be like to name a new species of orchid after my granny? It just made sense. Paul seems amazing. He's my lucky charm. He's well traveled. He told me he'd hitchhike across the Sahara on his own. He's going to be brilliant. What could go wrong? And we agreed to meet up with each other in Central America proper, so Panama City, beginning of March of the year 2000, to start this, what was only a 2.5-week walk, according to our 1995 edition of the Lonely Planet guidebook. It's not a 2.5-week walk.
And it's not a walk in the park either. Not exactly.
No.
I mean, so I first heard about the Darien Gap, I think I told you this, through Karl Bushby, who is somebody I interviewed spoke to a few weeks ago, who's been walking around the world since 1998. He walked through the Darien Gap and had some pretty hair-raising moments himself, but avoided any actual big issue, I suppose, or he made it out anyway, as planned. But yeah, he briefly mentioned you in passing. He mentioned these two mad, he got it a little bit wrong. He mentioned these two mad botanists, obviously one botanist and one not a botanist, but probably two mad people in a way, right? It's not a negative, but and
he's totally accurate. He's being polite, actually.
and anyway, yeah. So he told me about how you went in and you got kidnapped, taken captive, and all this kind of thing. And I was immediately in that conversation while I was recording. I was like, oh, I have to try and find one of these or both of these people at some point. And yeah, so I've got you. Just had to pay Karl some homage there, and I have got a few questions from Karl actually that I'll get to at some point. He's given me a few questions. But yeah, so carry on where you were then.
Absolutely.
You just had your Lonely Planet guide. You just read your guide. Had you been speaking to people as well? Did you kind of did you plan it much in advance? Were you getting advice from other people? That's one of Karl's questions, actually, funnily enough. But
so, yes, we were, Ben. The ignorance, me and Paul would say, the idiots that we were, looking back, and to this day for even attempting it. But what was I, 22, 23, Paul a couple of years older? You are invincible. And the trips me and Paul had up until that time, nothing had gone wrong. We both shared that with great enthusiasm. However, Paul is definitely slightly more, which isn't too hard actually, more sensible than me. In fact, he's way more, you might say that could be questionable for what happened next, but he is quite a sensible, rational person. I'm just plants, let's go and see some plants. And we did question people along the way, and individually we travelled independently of each other in Central America. Just to be clear, Ben, I don't know this guy from school or university. We have just met. There's something when you're backpacking, you get on with somebody, you bond, and you go off on a trip, and you digress, and you go off on another expedition somewhere with somebody you don't know. It's so frequently happens when you're backpacking. Some people can't understand why you've just met him. So how? But you do when you're traveling, and you know if you've been to places. It's like a sort of it's a family. It's a funny. You just trust people a lot more perhaps than perhaps you normally would, or whoever it is you meet. And that was that instant bond, and we just felt that invincible. It was so ridiculous looking back. But yes, we did ask a few people. We got foreign office statements which were quite clear. Don't do it. It's dangerous. The Panamanian army are down there. Fantastic. The orchids are going to be great. I mean, and the condition me and Paul set ourselves, if we get injured, if we break a leg or fall somewhere, we turn back. You know, obviously, if we get accosted by a Panamanian army group and so on, and, you know, they're really threatening and say, look, you've got to go back. Of course we would. But they just egged each other on. So beginning of March of the year 2000, me and Paul went to court from Panama City, the capital of Panama, in Central America. We caught a 6-hour bum-bruising, pothole-filled bus ride down the remainder of the Pan American Highway as it literally fizzles out into, quite suddenly, nothing. Just a wall of basically green. Off we got. The bus was packed when we left Panama City. There was just me and Paul and the bus driver shaking his head as we got out. And we thought, why is he shaking his head? Oh, well, let's get on with it. We bought these 3-foot-long machetes, which were so cheap and used to us. They were as blunt as anything. They bounced off blades of grass, but we looked serious. We had our rucksacks. We had our mosquito net. That tent was to save our lives. I still had from Tasmania, all part of the same trip. So into year 3 now.
That's unbelievable, by the way. I didn't realise that it was part of the same trip. That's crazy.
Still just phoned mum twice in nearly 3 years. It was getting ridiculous. And we just got our 1995 edition of the Lonely Planet guidebook. We got the route, had a map of the area, where to go, mentioned the danger, but not too much. Paul had bought the 2000 edition of the Lonely Planet guidebook, and it had nothing in it. No maps, no refreshment stops, no lovely local native information. It was just a succinct phrase, quite powerful, 2 blank center pages, except for top left, a little phrase, don't even think about it. And that made us question it. So we went into the Panamanian army office. Always a clue, Ben. If you've got barracks and helicopters and the army down there, perhaps you shouldn't go there. But no, me and Paul walked straight into the commander's office. We were actually requested to go in for a chat. Now, what are you two doing? I mentioned my love for orchids and my amazing granny. Want to see some new species of orchids. They just looked blankly at me. And Paul then mentioned there's a map behind the commandant who was very sort of, poker face. I mean, he was quite serious. And Paul just, that's the route that we can take. So he was getting inspiration from the map behind the commandante's head of where to go. And the commandante turned to us, which I wouldn't be talking to you now if he'd said something else. He just turned to us and said, well, you can if you want, but we don't recommend it. Green light. Totally agree. If you'll go there, you will die. We'll never see you again. Right, we're going back. No, it was that you can do it, but before we'd even finished, we'd left. And he shouldn't, it's no excuse. But an army's there, that's indication of how unsafe the region is. We could barely sleep the night that followed. We were so excited. Jumped up in the morning, got our rucksacks, donned all our equipment, and walked across. I'll never forget this rope bridge with thin, slatted softwood planks over this absolute torrent of a tropical river. And you had civilization 10 feet behind you as you stepped onto this bridge. Wilderness, uncharted exploration, uncharted plant hunting territory. Wow. It was the most spine-chilling, exciting, petrifying, pee your pants, most exciting time of my life, all in one breath, in a split second was there. Fear, dread, the most exciting time of my life, that moment of going into the rainforest and following our 1995 edition of the Lonely Planet guidebook. The little, not to scale, of course, and it was brilliant. We virtually got to the Colombian border within about 3 or 4 days. Our confidence was through the roof. It's the most safest place in the world. We met no trouble, didn't meet snakes, didn't meet angry locals. They were quite surprised to see us. We got 2 guides who were just standing in the middle of the pathway. I think they knew we were coming. They were waiting for us. I said, this is the border money exchange. Sorry, this guy and his trainers and this very disheveled sort of look said, yeah, and their name was Carlos. I can change money into Colombian pesos for you. Right, if We're in the middle of absolute, there's nobody here. So he said, okay, that's fine. And I'll be your guide. We were, I have to say, they were both Colombian, they said, and we were quite, okay. And Paul's like, Tom, we don't know these people, but let's progress on our own. So we basically quickly rushed. We knew the map we were following was right. The paths were getting quite bigger, quite much wider. And we went to the town of Paita, right on the border with Colombia, and would lose these guys. They'll lose interest. But no, they followed us. And we agreed $70 each, I think it was, for them to take us across the border. And it was the right decision. In hindsight, I think it's, well, difficult to say, but at the time it was the right decision. We would have got totally and utterly lost. They knew exactly the route. And what was it, March the 14th and March the 15th, trekking towards the Colombian border into the mountains. Not many orchids though, Ben. I was quite disappointed. Tough conditions though, but we had all the equipment. They had some food that they were getting for us too. And the night of March the 15th, I'll never forget, we had these local pava birds, like a turkey, basically, a Central American equivalent of a lovely, slightly thin actually, turkey. And we ate that. They shot it and we ate the turkey, had a lovely meal, a nice breakfast the next morning. And it was just, yeah, it shivers down my spine thinking about it. There was something about March the 16th. We were too far ahead of schedule. We were doing too well. It was the sight, the birds weren't chattering in the trees. It's hard to explain. Me and Paul were just so confident. And I thought, well, no orchid's worthy of Granny's name, but we're there. And the guides turned to us and said, Tom, Paul, we're 45 minutes from the Colombian border, mate. You know, what? We're there. And donned our rucksacks. Carlos went first. I'll never forget it. Francisco went second. Great chap, lovely chap. He was the hunter with the birds, and I was in third place. Unusually, actually, in third place. Paul was always behind them, but he got distracted by a mountain range. He wanted to come back and climb another time. He's never going back to the Darien Gap, nor am I. And we went into this clearing. It was weird, as if someone had got a fly-mower lawnmower and cut the tropical grass. It was actually the wild boar that, with their gnashes, as a fine, even cut throughout. Orchids dripping from the trees, air plants, palm trees, pine trees. It was Kew Gardens, eat your heart out. Kew with no glass in the tropical house. It was incredible. And it happened in slow motion. It was so weird. There's these two figures, then 3, 4, 5, 6 girls, really, 15-year-olds, I would say. 3 girls and 3 boys. Maybe the boys were 15, 16 at a push. Just ran at us. And we stared at these people with big M16s and AK-47 guns, bandanas, all the commander, camouflage gear on. Our 2 guides just collapsed to the floor with their hands on their heads. Me and Paul just looked. It was almost as it just wasn't happening. And then our thing called a kneecap, your knee, when it freezes and thaws so quickly with what it sees in front of you, you uncontrollably fall to the forest floor. Paul had fallen before I had. He went sheet. I mean, he just went white than snow. He was frozen with fear. And suddenly you've got a big gun stuck to your head, hands behind your backs. I mean, just split seconds. And they were these guys were petrified to see us. We just walked. Someone said, was it an ambush? Did the guide set you up? Was there talk of that over just a look of shock, of worry that perhaps they thought we had guns. What were these 2 white faces doing here? Of our to-be captors for the rest of the year, meant to me that we just stumbled across this patrol. It was just bang. If I'd gone to the toilet 5 minutes earlier, if anything could have happened, and we would have avoided them, I wouldn't be talking to you now. It was just, and bang. And they took our rucksacks off forcibly, with sort of me trying to help them. I had a little front rucksack and a big rucksack on the back, Paul the same. Then they tied us up. The only time they ever tied us up with what looked like garden string behind our backs. Still this cool M16, AK-47, Kalashnikovs, whatever, all the other things they had stuck to our and the guides' heads. The guides then were dragged off into the woods. I don't think they were executed. We're not sure if they were murdered. Still not quite sure. They've never been seen since. And me and Paul dragged off into the woods for the next 10 months in captivity. So kidnapped March the 16th for the rest of the year in captivity.
Wow. I mean, where do we even begin to like unpack that? I mean, so March 16th. So what date did you say it was when you started when you got off the bus, let's say?
Yeah, March 6th, 7th. 6th, 7th? That's right.
So about 9-10 days of walking, and it's been mostly blissful, mostly not so productive in terms of flowers, but a lovely, enjoyable, tiring, I'm guessing, and sweaty and everything like that as well, but an enjoyable experience.
Comfortable, Ben.
Comfortable.
I mean, there weren't the challenges particularly. We never got lost. It was an extraordinary, and of course that just buoyed us. And we always said, if the army were behind us now, if we had an injury, Paul said, if I break a leg, we go back. But we didn't sprain a muscle. That was to change. But until that point, and we were there. We were almost 45 minutes, and I would have been back home.
And so you went then from having that mentality of, just looking around and everything's good and you're enjoying where you are and you're just walking, thinking about plants. And then within the space of 5 minutes later, you've got this, like you say, cold metal pressed to your head, massive gun, bunch of other guns around. Probably they're talking in a language that you don't understand much of, I assume.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm guessing you're picking up maybe one word here and there or something like that. What was going through your mind at that point? Were you managing to keep it together? Because that's kind of one of those moments where that would separate humans, right? Some people, everybody react different. Some people would probably try and fight and get shot. Some people would be crying and screaming. Some people would be just, inconsolable wailing. Some people would probably try and talk their way out of it. Some people would go deathly quiet. I imagine everybody would deal with it differently, but what was going through your mind, and like, how did you approach that situation other than just to do what you were told?
I mean, literally, you could feel the urine going down your leg. It was amazing. You did that situation. It wasn't a slow burn. You bang, it happened so quickly.
Wow.
But for the most paradoxical place you're saying that you could be, you're screwed. And it was fascinating because, as you say, do you cry? But no, it was very much this self-preservation. You want to live every single hour of your life more than you think. And we don't even subconsciously, perhaps even, or consciously do it. It just, me and Paul, and very similar in that regard. Thank God. As you say, try and fight them, you're dead. You run away, just shoot them. Life there is not the same as it is in Europe. It really is a different mentality. So it was fascinating how I was actually amazed with myself and thinking and talking with you about it now. You really realize actually how this self-preservation comes in, the calmness inside you are absolutely all over the place, but this sort of volte-face, is it, whatever you say, and on the outside just let's see, how can I survive? How am I not going to get executed this afternoon? What am I going to do and calmness is obviously one of those things. And all that followed for the next year, nearly 10 months in captivity, just dealing with each second as it comes. Right, they want to kill us now. Whatever they did we'll talk about it in a minute. But it was that real. I've never been as scared as that in my life. And through the whole of captivity, nothing could match that. It was prolonged mental pain in the captivity that followed. But that one moment of back, and you can never match that. Whatever happens in life, that won't be matched. That is an exceptional sense of flaming heck. And Paul, we were very calm, and Paul, we were white. I mean, Paul just turned like snow. I mean, he was white from being pink in the face and look at this, Tom, and look at that, to bang on our knees. So it was quite an adjustment, and you had to do it quickly. And I think we did a reasonably good job overall. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you. We'd be dead.
Yeah, successful job of that, I would say.
But to answer the question, wow, that is awesome. That is a petrifying experience. And our guides, we turned around and the guides were gone. So we still don't really know what happened.
Yeah, that's rough. How is it to talk about? Obviously, you've been doing it now for 20 years. You've been talking about it, and you must have told your story countless times. But so I'm supposing it's got a bit easier over that time. But is it still hard? Obviously, I'm going to force you to talk about it anyway, even if it's hard. But is it still hard to talk about it? Does it still make you feel emotional? And how do you feel now? Resurfacing it.
Sort of. It's funny, isn't it? very cathartic. I find it good sort of mentally to talk about it. Paul isn't the same. He doesn't do talks. I give quite a few talks to the local WI, the Women's Institute here, and garden societies or whatever it is, and talks around the garden we're doing here now. So, and it is sort of quite therapeutic. I go as deep as you like. I don't sort of mind. I think it makes me realize how lucky I am, how stupid we were, but how lucky I am to have got out of that situation and to live each day. I mean, that expression is, to live each second of each day. We're so lucky here in this country. A lot of us don't realize, actually, wow, we are very lucky to live in the UK. So I enjoy it, and it's very cathartic and very, as I say, very therapeutic. I think that's perhaps a way of dealing with it, perhaps. It's how I sort of deal with it in life. I tend to be a bit like that with things. This is quite extreme, this, my time as a hostage, but it tends to be a similar sort of, vein of thought. That's very much sharing it. And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Definitely. So tell me then, obviously we're not going to be able to talk through every hour of every day in detail that you were there, because we'd be here for 9-10 months, but tell me those kind of, even the first few minutes, like, so you've gone from on your knees and your brain is kind of overcoming the panic and the shock, and you're processing, you're trying to deal with it, trying to understand, trying to figure out. But what happened then? So how long were you on your knees? If you remember, obviously you didn't have a big clock with a timing exactly, but how long did it feel like? How did they then pick you up, drag you off? How long were you walking with them? What were kind of the next steps? And
and then a similar pattern then followed. So the first bit's good to mention, to say the least. So it felt like an age when we were on our knees. I mean, I didn't even get pins and needles. I was on my knees for a split of seconds, I think, pretty much. A minute, maybe at the most in total. But it felt like days. Every second was literally like an hour. It was everything just slow. Yet it was so fast around us. Guns, right? Your life is going to be terminated pretty dramatically here, Thomas. But yet everything was just sort of, it was weird, sort of two universes, the reality, and in your head it was like you get a tape recorder that's knackered at the end of its life. Really weird stuff. But it wasn't long. It was 10-20 seconds probably, I suspect, before they actually grabbed us to our feet and forcibly, with a gun behind your back, didn't physically drag us, but pushed with a gun to about 30-40 feet away to this clearing where we'd come from by the river, and in just searching all our stuff, passports. There was hardly any money. We hadn't had any. We had a few travelers' checks, bank cards. They were looking. They couldn't understand where the guns and the knives. So we explained, I'm looking for orchids, and Paul's a mountaineer. We tried already in my faltering Spanish. God, I don't know what I came out with, but they seemed to get the idea that we really weren't CIA drug runners. That immediately was coming up. And me and Paul, we're not being shot for something that we're not. Me and Paul hardly talked, I should be clear. This is almost a subliminal conversation that me and Paul were having without actually talking. It was extraordinary how that guy I didn't know, and vice versa too, we were to save each other's lives countless times over the next 10 months. We just worked off each other so well without even meaning to. He was high, I was low. I was high, he was low. He neutralized everything almost between us. We did, to a level playing field of how we're going to deal with things. I would be dead on my own and he'd be dead too, he said. There's no way. But between us, my sort of eccentric behavior and excitement for life, and Paul very much more calmer, and it met in the middle. It was an amazing relationship. So to answer your question, Ben, we sat underneath this guava tree, a lovely fruit from the tropics, which are becoming a bit more commonplace in European supermarkets. A lovely fruit with a pink, fleshy, salmon pinky center, juicy, sugary fruit. And there was a rotting one on the floor. So they'd untied us at this stage, I should say. So we were tied up for a very short time. And I picked up this fruit, and I could see the maggot coming out the top, and I could see there was a millipede in it. And Paul was looking at me going, okay, what are you doing? I just basically shoved it in my mouth and started eating it. It was disgusting and didn't taste like, I knew it was going to be disgusting. I wasn't trying to, as a nice fruit. It was obviously not me thinking about it. I just did it. And thinking back, why did I do it? I can only ascertain to get a reaction out of them, to see what they were like. It was my only sort of way of doing it. And then I sort of, well, turned around to them and said, "Oh, it's rotten, you know. There's a stick. Can I throw a stick to get it into the tree?" And they turned their backs, and I was already throwing this stick in to get some nice ripe ones hanging in the tree. And they looked at me, and then they all started. There's this funny smile coming across some of their faces, and that meant a lot. Trying to humanize them, trying to start to get across who I was and Paul. And it was a tactic we employed throughout, without fail, however much under pressure we were on. That's a tactic, not with guava fruit, but in a whole range of other ways. Nicknames for them, doing silly things. You know, we tried to get across them who we were and humanize them as much as possible. So in my head, they wouldn't blow our heads off. And I got a nice fruit off the tree, and I ate a ripe fruit, and they could look at me and they could see it. He knows what a guava is. Okay, and I explained the Latin name of the guava, but didn't understand what I was talking about. Paul was like, "What are you doing?" sort of look. But it was just to extend my life for another hour. That's how. Yeah. But I didn't think. I just was doing it. It was no mind. I'm going to pick up that fruit now. Oh, it's got to make. No, it happened. It was extraordinary. Your body, mind are just linking up, and they're going together and going with it. This is how you're going to extend your life for the rest of the day. It was like that. It was bizarre. Wow. Then we went to our first camp, which was to be for about 6-7 days. And they just insisted that we were CIA and drug runners. This went on for months. But basically the pattern was this very nomadic lifestyle that we lived there. We went from camp to camp for the next 10 months. There were about 700 different faces that we saw. 700. A third of those were girls, young ladies. The rest boys, young men, average age 16, 17, armed to the teeth. Me and Paul couldn't work out. We are in the middle, and some of the places we went to were even more in the middle of nowhere that were to follow in the months to come. And they're just so well armed. Quite a good source of food, packeted rice, chicken flavorings, lots of cows in the area. So the locals must be assisting them in all of this without any choice, I do suspect. And it was bizarre. And obviously I'm not recommending the experience, but after being kidnapped, we saw some fantastic orchids I would never have seen without being kidnapped. Right up into the mountains we went, and I built gardens with them. I say with them, they soon got bored. We went on these armed orchid patrols. They let me go on. I mean, we got away with quite a bit, never tied up again. So we were quite free, is not the word to use, but you could feel this invisible leash wrapple around your neck when you got more than 30 feet from the commandante's hut, you know. But it was extraordinary. Makeshift camps, 4 V-sticks with poles to link up, 4 poles to link up a square, and then slatted banana and palm leaves to make your mattress. Often then sat this 2-man tent, the very small 2-man tent I travelled into Tasmania with, was to be our home for the rest of the year. But again, the orchid hunting, I was more orchid hunting in that during captivity than any time in my life. It was the most fantastic but terrifying place. Orchids are great, you're going to die. Every second you had that for 10 months. Mock executions then started to appear, aggression, and we just handled it as if we were kidnapped every day of our lives. I love the orchids here. I love the orchids in here. I love the orchids. This is my dream place to live. And they didn't know what to. Obviously, I was controlling a lot of what I was saying. I was faking a lot of it. But they wanted to hear, "Oh, your granny. Oh, you know, I'm sorry I miss my granny, senor. Oh, good, he misses his stupid granny." That plays into their hands because they can relate to a granny or a friend or dad or mum or sister. But to say I love the orchids, to relate to where you were now, they didn't want to be there. We knew that. They didn't want to even kidnap us. I think a lot of them were so bored with it and fed up with it. But I just played on that. And it was only partly true because we wanted to get, obviously, the hell out of there alive. Yeah. But it was a tactic. And building gardens was also escapism at the same time. Yeah.
It's just, it's unbelievable. There's so many directions I could go in now, so many different questions I could ask you, and there's so many I want to ask you. I guess, firstly, just to kind of get that out of the way, did they say explicitly, like, you can't go, or was it just a completely, like, you just felt that, and you just kind of understood that, and you just didn't want to risk walking away because you felt like you'd get shot in the back? Or did you ever ask them directly, like, can we just go? Like, was that ever kind of vocalized? Yeah.
It's so funny. It's a great point. I don't think I've ever been asked that. It's such an obvious point. I mean, never vocalized for sure. It was an understanding that
Yeah,
didn't need to be stated. Using your vocal cords, you leave us, you'll be executed. There was no question of that. And where the hell do we
yeah,
go, Ben? Where the
yeah.
hell do we go? No compass will save you here. You either know the local native paths or you are stuffed.
Mm,
You will die in the
yeah,
jungle. They knew that. They knew that we didn't know the area. Well, we're tourists. So there was no actual sort of vocalization of that. It was interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought of it like that. Yeah, actually, it's wonderful. But it's been a couple of weeks. I must get home, sort of thing. We did occasionally ask. I think at the beginning we then just gave up in the end because it then turned to $5 million each they wanted before they'd execute us. So they switched their
yeah,
line of thinking down to money quite quickly. But it was
yeah.
very much this sort of mindset of just digging in. And especially as the weeks went on, I think initially there was how much longer for. There was a couple of things we started to write. No, tomorrow you'll be free. There was a couple of light-hearted banter with that, but me and Paul thought, well, there's no point in asking anymore. We're only going to get our hopes up to something that they're starting
Yeah,
to lie now. They don't know what's
yeah,
going on properly as well. So it was soon knocked on the head, all of that idea of trying to ask them to leave. But it certainly was a great mental test, and that you do feel if you can survive that, you can survive anything. And I think it was, wow. They then
yeah.
tried to split after 6 weeks. They tried to split us up, Ben. So one person. Apparently, this has been done quite a lot actually throughout the world in hostage situations. If there's two
Mm,
or more of you, send one person home to get the money and come back, or to get something to bring back in exchange. And
mm,
then you can all go home. But me and Paul knew the person left behind, me or Paul, would be dead, because they're not going to go and get $10 million. They were fantasizing about this $10 million. The person left behind is dead. And we stuck to it. They were determined to split us up. They tried every tactic in the book to split us up. Paul says you're a wanker. He hates you. And Paul wouldn't have said that in my head. Oh, yes, senor. Yes, senor. Yes, senor. And then vice versa. They take us to one side for hours on end and try and get us to think perhaps that Paul was not a nice person. But I didn't know Paul that well, but I knew him well enough to know he wouldn't say that or do that. Never did it ever cross my mind that they were telling the truth. But quite a good tactic. They persisted with that. And me and Paul didn't really say stop doing it. We sort of went along with it to see, what else do you do, Ben?
yeah.
And it was tough. That was mentally. Paul was beginning to doubt things and saying, not about what I had said, or they're making all that up, but just doubting, where's this going to end? Are they forcibly going to take one of us out
Yeah,
back to where we've come from to get this money that doesn't exist? Because whoever's left behind is stuffed, and that's that.
yeah.
So we just dug in, and they eventually gave up on that tactic.
Wow. I mean, you mentioned that the aggression and stuff started to mount up a little bit, and you said they were kind of mock executions, or they were kind of threatening executions. But I mean, obviously, even without that, your mind is going to start to play tricks, and at a certain point, you're going to start to think, well, not even tricks. Your mind is just going to start to kind of think about things, and you're going to start to think, I'm probably not going to make it out of here. Like, firstly, did you have those thoughts, and how long into it did you start to think there's a solid chance we're going to die here in the Darien Gap? But then second kind of part of that question would be just to tell me a bit about, their aggression and how that escalated, and what kind of things in regards to threats on your life that you had to deal with, because that's obviously like one of the hardest things there is, right? That's
Sure. And sustained too. And the fact they're so young, the unpredictability of everything was
Mm,
amazing. I'll get to the points in a sec, but just to say that me and Paul, we tried to guess for every minute virtually of 10 months in captivity nearly that we were there, of what they were going to do next. I don't know. Were they going to go and have a bath? Were they going to go off and get a cow? Were they going to come in and beat us up? We never guessed right once, because they weren't even in control of anything either. And that petrified us. We didn't know what they were so unpredictable. They didn't mean to
wow.
be. That it was just the nature of the situation. And of course, their age too, just teenagers. But yeah, Ben, to get onto the questions, 6 months in, half a year in, this $10 million was not appearing, and they began to doubt it. And they took it out on us and said, well, it's not coming because they've lied to us, or they made all this stuff up. So no physical, really hard beatings. One guy took a huge swing at me. We called him the Knight. Massive black bloke, as wide as he was tall, Virgie, absolutely built, and gave me a punch to the arm. Well, I thought my arm was going to fall off. The bruise he left. They were just frustrated. They just wanted this to end. They'd had enough of holding hostage these two white people. And it really was getting nasty with the change in command. So every sort of 2 or 3 months, you'd get a new commandante, the boss. All chaps? Yeah, all chaps. Except towards the end, there was a chap, we called him Goofy, this amazing sort of goofy sort of cartoon jawline, really nasty chap with his other half. Who was called, quite politely actually, the bitch. She was so nasty. Bits of fingers weren't there. There was a couple of the earlobes were missing, and there was, these two have killed people in our heads, and we thought, well, they're the commandante towards the end. They're going to have him. As the situation deteriorates, he'll be the one that kills us. It was our sort of. So to answer your second part, yeah, we did start to seriously question. I wrote my will home. I say home, so I wrote my will to give to Paul in case he was released, and vice versa. It was all getting. I didn't cry that much, actually, amazingly, during the whole experience. A couple of tears, but full on blubbering. But I did writing that will. Dear Mum and Dad, my sister can have my stamp collection. I'm sorry for doing all of this and putting you through it. I mean, it was heavy, hardcore stuff, Ben. Jeepers. And they just, you could, atmosphere, I mean, you could cut it with a knife. It was so tense. They were just pissed off. They were so fed up with it all. And they just blamed us, particularly me, perhaps because speaking the Spanish, they seemed to think that I was more intelligent because I could speak a bit of Spanish. I understood the situation a lot more. Perhaps they sort of had this thing of, why me? Perhaps I was the go-between with Paul, because he deliberately thought, I'm not learning any Spanish. These guys are all idiots, and cut himself off from it. Probably deliberately, actually. And I understand that. He didn't want to hear what they were saying at night about what they were going to do to us, and serious stuff, which thankfully they never did. But we thought we were going to be terminated at the end. Until the eve of us eventually being released was when we nearly legged it. We were just Ben, minutes away from legging it. We had a bit of a broken mirror that we found on the floor, quite a sharp edge to it. We cut the back of the tent, and we were ready to climb out the back of the tent if this storm came over, which the rain, so heavy, torrential rain, would cover the noise of us running, and together with the lightning, and the storm went all the way around the camp where we were and avoided us. So we didn't leg it, and we thought, that's it, we're going to die here. So it was December the 9th, hard. It was building. Something was building, but someone changed their minds. Probably a commandante we never met. Someone made a decision somewhere. It was, if they were to make the decision, the commandante at the time, we would have been shot, no question. He was ready, just please, you could hear him. He loved the thought of, and torturing beforehand and then killing the hostage was his speciality, it seemed to me and Paul. The bitch would just sort of salivate at the thought of it. I mean, these two were at a different level. They were hardcore. And someone told them that I saw it with me and Paul. This guy walked off on December the 10th in the morning, walked up into the hills and came back down. He left a really jubilant person. He thought, yeah, we're going to kill them. And he came back all annoyed. He told the commandante Goofy something, and he got so frustrated around this campfire he had. He kicked the fire and the embers all over the place in his welly boots. We all wore welly boots because it was so wet, and they were quite practical. They didn't degrade as quickly as normal shoes. And he got all the embers stuck to his boot. He was on fire. Technically on fire. So it got worse. The bitch was slagging us off, throwing bits of stones, and me and Paul looked at each other and went, this is fantastic. Because we knew if they were annoyed, we had a chance of not being killed. It's when they sort of smiled a little bit and smirked, oh dear. But no, they were so infuriated and just came up to me and Paul and said, well, you can, in lots of fiery language you might imagine from them, basically you can go, here's all your stuff. If you come back, we'll blow your heads off. Sorry, Senor, you can go home, see your effing this and effing mum and granny and all this sort of stuff. And he walked off. And up came this guy to us with all our stuff. So we had our passports given back, our cameras, health passport, driver's license, Lloyd's TSB card from the high street in Sevenoaks was given back to us, and Paul's $3,500 worth of traveller's checks were given back to him. I mean, at this stage, we were like, I was like, no, this is a trick. And Paul, for the first time, he was generally the more negative person with right. He was usually always right. It was Tom, the positive person. I was usually wrong about what they were going to do next. But he turned to me and went, Tom, they would have shot us now, mate. What's the point in giving all our stuff back? And I was like, right. And this guy came up to us who had been with us from day one. Pretty gormless bloke, really, about 18 years. We called him Perty. He had these amazing pert nipples. And he turned to us and went, yeah, you two pricks. I'll show you the piece, he said. Sorry? Here's all your stuff. Get your stuff together. So we packed. I've never packed a rucksack up so quickly. But I was like, okay, if Paul's right. So Paul just turned to me and said, the only thing, Tom, they might exchange us to another group, see if they can get any money out of it. That was the big concern in our minds. We've heard that had happened before. And down the path we went, and he said, there you go. Oh, that's great, Perty. So we didn't call him Perty, Senor. We turned back. That's great. That's wonderful. Can you just tell us where to go? What the hell? He'd gone. And in the jungle, it's amazing. 5 feet in front of you, you can't see the person ahead of you. I mean, it's just so dense. And so he walked out and got to this crossroads, and we turned left into this grassland area with a lovely view. We were in Columbia, and we were continuing the path 100 yards back. We crossed the border into South America, and it was just 100 or so yards back. We recognized the place where we were kidnapped 10 months earlier. Paul went, that's it. We are on the right road. And we entered into this clearing and got kidnapped again. It was an absolute nightmare. These people running at us. It was Will Smith. We named him Will Smith. He was just like the Hollywood actor, but 4 foot shorter. And he was all right, Will. But he was so nervous. On the floor. So on the floor we went, all the guns came out, and these blokes appeared out of the grass. And we recognised them all. Oh, it's you two. What are you doing? The guy up the road said we could go. Oh, that's wonderful. Do you want some food? No, we better be going now. No, Tom, do you want some food? Senor, it's very kind. I think we're going. And out came this revolver. Tom, would you like to stay for some? Love to. Whatever you're cooking, thank you. So, and we stayed and had turkey. They gave us cheese, tangerine, and soft drinks and stuff. They were guarding a radio tower, it looked like. And they said, you know where you're going? We'll give you a guide. And down the hill we went, and we called him No Idea. And he had just one eye and no idea. It was this stuff came out of his, like worms and maggots and things came out of his socket. No. Oh, he was. And we got to this crossroads again, and he said, "Oh, you can go now, Tom and Paul. That's great." And which way do we go, Snow? Just to check. He's gone again. Bugger. We turned left, got it wrong, and we were going to die. So we took the wrong turning, and the jungle was going to kill us. 5 days of submerged in water trying to cross this swamp. And we got trench rot. My feet had never split like that before. It was rough. Whenever they dried out, you'd sleep with your back on the swamp between 2 root balls of floating mangroves. Oh, my goodness, Ben. All the food that we had was rotting. And Paul said, Tom, we've got to go back for directions, mate. So back up the hill we went to our captors. This was never going to be a simple ending.
You did have to go back for direction, because I heard that via Karl, like in like a Chinese whisper sense, and I was like, no, that can't be right.
So back up the hill we went. Yeah. Wow. So I was like, Paul, we're gonna. Apart from being kidnapped at the beginning, that was the actual ambush. That was my scariest moment. I was like, Paul, Tom, I've said to you before, mate, we're screwed if we don't, and they're not going to shoot us now. But they would have done it. So we followed these. We had a machete that we'd stolen off them. Amazing. Paul was a fantastic thief, exceptional thief. And all the food we had was stolen from them over the months in case we had to escape. And we'd slash between us the sides of trees as markers. And we followed the markers up to the camp and the radio mast. And you could see these people coming out, not the same lot of people we didn't recognize this time. And they looked, but people that did recognize us were just, out came the guns, and we're on our hands and knees, guns behind our heads. And we were like, this is all over again. And the one guy came up and went, it's Tom and Paul, it's Thomas and Pablo. What the hell are you doing? Senor, I'm so sorry. We got lost. If you bring the army back, we'll kill army? No, we haven't brought any army back. We're lost. And they said, you turn right, you tits, not left. So do you want to stay for food? It's Christmas. Wonderful. We're going. And we legged it down the hill, turned right. And within 4 or 5 hours of that, we were in this old deserted park ranger's house with 2 park rangers on a CB radio to the embassy in the Colombian capital. And it was extraordinary. And we were airlifted out by a speedboat, bulletproof cars, and a private jet 24 hours later. Happy Christmas. Honestly, it was unbelievable. I'm back here for Christmas Eve.
Wow. That is unbelievable. That is wild.
It was totally. And what really did it for me was the ambassador's wife, who just stared at us in the Colombian capital, Bogota. The ambassador's wife, she was just amazing. She just stared at us, and she didn't find the joke funny, which made it even more brilliant. Behind her back, she says, "I've got a memento of Colombia for you." This is the ambassador's wife, just remind you, Ben. And she had a box each of Ferrero Rocher she produced, and me and Paul were like, she's spoiling us. And she didn't find it funny. She just said, well, ambassador's wife, I give you Ferrero Rocher. And we didn't know what to say, and we took them off her, and we demolished them in seconds and got on a British Airways flight back home to the UK to my memorial service. My memorial service was coming up. Paul had his, so they buried him in their own way. So they had to undo his own memorial service. Oh, it was the nuts. And over 3 years of traveling, and would I take back a second of that? No. Absolutely not. I was not thinking that at the time during captivity, but now absolutely not. It's changed my life.
Yeah. Wow. Like that's wow. That's so many twists and turns. That's unbelievable. I mean, the bit about when you kind of got almost re-kidnapped in that clearing, I immediately just went into my head. I was like, oh, okay, that's where the thing that Karl said about them needing to go back for a map. I said, that must be that little, okay. But no, you actually had to go back again. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I don't know what words to use. I mean, that's just insane.
It's totally ridiculous. And the other thing which we couldn't believe is when they re-released us for the second time of asking, let's get that right, or released us for the third time of asking in total, was when they gave us money. And here's some money. They were paying, our captors, get this right, were paying for us to go because they couldn't stand me talking about orchids any longer. So it was supposed to be the other way around. You pay your No, they paid us to go. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But in all seriousness, obviously should never have been there. And very, very lucky to be alive. You make your own luck, yes, to a degree, but you can't help but feel in this case it's more than luck. It's a bit of the guy upstairs. It's a combination of fate. It's everything that just meant that we were supposed to survive that.
Yeah, and I think you obviously handled it, very well. I mean, I'm surprised you're not kind of, I mean, obviously you're dedicated to the plants and flowers, but if you didn't have that, you could probably be giving lectures and talks on how to handle a hostage situation to people in dangerous areas, because it sounded like you did it by the book. Wow. I mean, look, I'm conscious of the time, so I do want to ask you a few more questions about the experience. Obviously, we could probably do another hour, 3 hours on that, on just your experience in the Darien Gap. But I'll try and skim through a little bit, just a couple of questions, but it was just little things I was intrigued about. So kind of how were they feeding you? So like, did you have like 3 meals a day? What kind of food was it? Were they giving you the same food as them, and drink as well? Like that?
Yeah, it was pretty much 3 meals a day. The exception was the walking. Oh, Ben, the walking. I mean, that was hardcore. I mean, it was hardcore. Yes, anything that moved was shot. Apart from a human, we didn't eat human. We're not sure actually, but we don't think we ate somebody else. We're not actually sure. That we literally was getting so desperate. The remoter areas they took us to, the more remoter the area, the more difficult to get foodstuffs too. They took us to areas, I think, to hide us is what they kept saying, away from paramilitary and people like that. So paramilitary. So we ate anything. So monkey was often there. The hair from a monkey always got stuck in the soup, and you ended up swallowing a bit of its rubber finger and things like that. Armadillo was on the list. Grubs, a spider or two, depending how bad the situation was with the lack of cow, basically cow and platanos. So unripe bananas used as a potato substitute. So we ate pretty much anything that was there. So dramatic seeing a whole troop of howler monkeys coming above our heads. Oh, look at these monkeys. They do make a real racket right above your head. Aren't they so gorgeous? Up went the M16s and they were just blown to bits out of the trees. And the gorillas knew it was fun. They looked at us and they knew, you could tell that these are all howler monkeys are a protected species, internationally a protected. They knew it. But they also realized, and I could sort of see their point in a way, that we would die without it. We were really struggling for them to get supply lines in. The water was a nightmare. So, I mean, I didn't literally wait for the rains to come and get it and curl a leaf up like you see in the films or something, and then sort of use it as a filter to drink out of a leaf or something. I mean, that didn't sort of come about really. You were drinking from the river. Yes, it was boiled occasionally, but as long as you could just about see the palm of your hand in the water, just about, you thought, well, I'll give it a go. The outcome sometimes was horrendous. I mean, the dysentery was exceptional. You would bleed out of your bum. I mean, you just bleed and you think, am I just going to bleed out? You know, what the hell is happening? But the body adjusted. That was early stages. Having said that, your body in the end could pretty much take anything, really. It just adjusted and adapted remarkably well. But there was one stage when you do go to the toilet and out of your bum comes blood and you think, no, that's not ideal.
No, that's not
ideal.
So in terms of that, the toilet then, how did that work? Did they watch you? Like, was there always somebody with you? Because I'm assuming it wasn't like, oh, go off into the jungle and we'll wait till we can't see you, and because you might run away. But what was it like? What was
it was the latter, actually. It's what you said. I mean, there was an element of trust, and they were right. I mean, where are you going to go then? You know, and they did believe us. And I like to think then one of the other reasons they released us, I'm not fully answering the question here, but just to mention this, is that I really believe that they believed who we were. A gardener and a mountaineer who shouldn't have been there. Why would they release you? Otherwise, if you were CIA, they would have shot you or whatever. So I do believe that. But no, the toilet thing was interesting. Very rarely. At the beginning, there was lots of tension, trust issues. They didn't know who we were. We had no idea who they were. So they didn't stand over us with the hole they dug in the ground. It was mostly that. If it was a long-term camp, otherwise it was crap anywhere. So we used to crap quite close to their little huts. It really annoyed them. Anyway, so a little tactic there was quite funny. Anyway, it was so they were quite relaxed at the end. I mean, we picked up guns to give to them. It was just guns everywhere. So we picked up their guns. Senor, here's your weapon. Oh, thank you, Tom. You know, it was a weird, and we sort of built. We'd earned that in a way. We'd that sort of trust.
And you're trying to do anything to build little bits of trust, I suppose, here and there, just to win a few points. Like, I'll pass you a gun, and that way you see I'm not going to shoot you the first time I get to touch
Exactly right. I mean, but in the first 3 or 4 weeks, no, there wasn't even that thought. I mean, it was really tense. They watched every move. Didn't quite stand over us at the toilet, but they were making sure they could see at least a leg behind a bush or something.
Here's an interesting question, one that I was thinking about, and obviously I don't really know what you're going to answer, how you're going to answer it. But did you kind of over the course of the 9-10 months, and again, I'm obviously talking about 1 or 2 possibly individuals, not the kind of group in general that took you, but did you build any relationship, like any kind of positive relationship? Obviously it would have had a side of complete negativity because they're holding you, but was there any kind of elements of positive relationship that you built with any of the people there, your hostage taker, your guards, however
there
was.
You
want to call them?
I mean, this Stockholm syndrome thing, obviously we knew about me and Paul before we went there. We'd heard about that and in other situations, and we did play on that a little bit. Whether it was all genuine, I think a lot of it was on both parts. I think there was a couple of guys that were there, one called Scarface, and he was amazing. He was a local Kuna Indian, so a lot of the local population, a lot of the people that were holding us were robbers or murderers or whatever they were, escaping the conflict from all over Colombia. So these guys were coming from hundreds of miles away into the jungle as a refuge to escape. the army or whoever, paramilitary. But the locals, you could tell them apart a lot. They were quite good at tracking, quite good at not getting us lost, which was always getting lost with them. Me and Paul were better on our own before we got kidnapped. With our captors, they were always, because they were city folk, a lot of them, really. They didn't know about the jungle. But a couple of locals, you could tell, and we chatted occasion. It was niceties, right? Good morning and goodbye and thanks for the food. You weren't getting into in-depth conversations about their lives. They would just clam up. You would try it, but they clammed up. They were not going to say anything.
So there wasn't one who would like open up and talk to you properly, like when the others weren't listening or around or anything like that. Like, oh, I don't really want to be here. I don't want to be doing this.
There wasn't. Yes, Scarface was that chap, but not quite as.
Not to that extent.
As visible as that, yeah, to that extent. But he's certainly, you could tell he didn't want to be there. He shouldn't be there. He doesn't kidnap foreigners. That's not his. And he did say, I miss my family, and an indication that I think both of them had been killed. So he was then drawn into this sort of conflict and so on. But amazing character. We called him Scarface. It was top right to bottom left. It was almost cut his head into two, this wound. I mean, I daren't ask him, it looked like a machete wound of some sort. But he seemed to me to be, if you met him away from the situation in Panama, you'd get on well with him. He was a bit of that. But then the Commandante would appear, or the personality of the Commandante, Ben, a better way of putting it, would be completely different to the new person coming in. So say he was quite nice, Will Smith, for example. In came Goofy, nasty. That aura was fed down to the personalities of every one of the foot soldiers, almost instantaneously. The guy didn't say, don't trust the tourists, they're all idiots and they're CIA. He didn't even have to say that. His aura dictated, without him having to say anything, issuing orders or whatever, how they were feeling. And then that Scarface would become a killer again. And it was me and Paul were like, whoa, all that mental energy to try and get people on board, to humanize them. And so in the end, last 3 months, we gave up. It was a waste of time. And it was a total and utter waste of time, because whatever you said to it, however much you got a bit of genuine information out of them, when it came down to it, when they're told to do something, they will do it. And that petrified. Just shoot Tom. He's a drug dealer. No problem at all. Can you dig the hole as well so he can fall into it? No problem. And they would. They wouldn't even hesitate, however nice they were to you when they were told to do something. Yeah. So you're like, okay. It was petrifying.
On that note, did you make your peace with death, or did you kind of never really want to truly do that? Did you always fight against it?
No, a peace with it, or just an acceptance, not giving
That's
in.
kind of what I mean, an acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance, not by any means giving in the situation.
No.
Physically, we were pretty good. Paul had a couple of wobbles, the dysentery and everything else. That was almost like catching a mild sore throat equivalent. We're so used to blood coming out of our bottoms, So you just get used to all of that sort of stuff. But very much, I think towards the end, we couldn't see an exit. We couldn't see, they're not getting their money. Therefore, generally what happens in these situations, you die.
Yeah.
Even though we had no control over getting them, it was not going to appear. There wasn't the money. It's not going to happen. But in their heads, they even saw Mum in a helicopter in their heads with $50 million one morning. So you see, they were fantasizing, Ben. You see, and we knew whatever we said actually probably made it worse. So in the end, there was a little bit of acceptance. Paul was really getting down over it. So when we released, it literally was a bolt from the blue. I mean, that was literally out of nowhere. It totally went against the grain of the degradation of the situation. Shall I say deterioration of the situation. Down, bang. We were released. I mean, it was out of nowhere. The night before, as I said to you, was when we were going to try and escape because of the severity of the situation. But we got it wrong. Yeah. Someone else, whoever was in charge, said, let them go.
Have you, as people approached you to try and make a film out of it, like
over
like
the
Hollywood?
French and Saunders, the comedians here, they bought the rights for it for a couple of years. They loved it. It was quite a comical angle to some of the stories in the jungle as well, and the hilarity of it as well as the seriousness of it. So they bought it. Over the years, people have, but it usually fizzles out. Me and Paul still reckon they'll never do anything with it. But people occasionally ring up. Warner Brothers liked the idea of orchids and guns, and and all this sort of stuff. But no, nothing's materialized. I'm not sure it ever will.
Yeah, I mean, what do I know? But that would sell. That
Do you
would
reckon
be
it would sell?
like, yeah. I mean, hearing it in person, it's like another level. Like hearing the twists and turns, like that's a no-brainer. Like, come on, somebody's got to do it. I've got a friend who's a filmmaker. I'll see what we can do.
Absolutely, let's do it.
But looking back, you obviously, I mean, I'm assuming I know the answer to this, but you realize how lucky you were, right? Because obviously there were other, like, people have been murdered out there quite regularly, I think. Like Karl Bushby, he mentioned somebody to me, that Jan Philip Branush, a Swedish tourist that was shot in the head, executed, I think, near Rio Sucio area.
Where we were.
And it was by the FARC
where we were. Yeah.
guerrillas as well. That's who is suspected to have taken you, right? I think that's who they think it was. Not that anybody knows for certain.
That's right, and we almost, me and Paul, we rang each other up. Actually, he's turned into his amazing friend, Paul, a fantastic chap, and we heard about this Swedish chap, and we reckon that was exactly we were at Rio Sucio. That's where they took us to the most southerly point, well into Colombia now, and we reckon it was almost at the exact spot where we can picture it, where he was murdered almost, and his wife, Chinese wife, I think it was his wife, or going to be wife, sadly, I think, as well. Well, it's all sad anyway. She got in contact and said, through the church, is there anything that I can do? And then, of course, we then heard the news and so on, and it's probably the same guys that we were with that killed him. Or if not, a youngster at the time that we were with, who now's the commandante who killed him.
Some overlap.
Right. Some overlap. Right, Ben. It's so sad, isn't it? I can't say whether he was trying to escape, whether he tried to resist, or whether it doesn't seem the case from the story. They just turned around and went, "We've had enough." He was trying to cross it south to north, very rarely, if I've got that right. He had just started the journey, if I've got that right. He was going from Columbia to Panama, which often isn't the case. And what's it like now? I mean, that's a very sad story. And more recent, in the last 2 or 3 years, apparently it's become more dangerous. There's not the war anymore officially, but it's all of the immigration coming up from South America. It's a huge migration route now. It always has been quite big, but with the war ceasing, with the guns stopping to a degree, it's now just this huge migratory route. But actually, somebody said the guns are all still there, and all these people in charge of all that, they paid a fortune to give people the right of passage across this strip. Very poorly militarized still by the Panamanians. It's pretty much a lawless land still, and it's actually probably more dodgy now than it was back in the day. Lots of different factions fighting over, being paid a fortune, these guys with guns. They see themselves as perhaps a tour guide taking across all these immigrants, because without guides, you get lost.
Wow. Here's the big question then, I guess. So you said that you believe that they believed your story. And I think that sounds legit. I believe you that they believed you. I think absolutely, if they didn't, then why would they would have killed you. But the real question is, because that's not enough by itself for them to keep you alive, I don't think necessarily, right? Because, I mean, just look at this guy. That's the perfect example. Look at Jan. So why do you think you were kept alive?
I think it's a combination of things. It's lightly touched upon. I think that we didn't show we weren't going to run away. They were trusted us entirely. They didn't feel threatened by us in any sense. We were so opposite of them. We were not we weren't unpredictable at all. We were very same day, same thing. Emotions, hardly smiled, cried that much. They trusted us. I do believe in the end, Ben, they believed us. I don't think until the end some of them did. And so some of them really wanted to kill us. But just a combination of things. I mean, on paper, there's no money. They didn't get exchange a prisoner, a food drop. Perhaps we thought there'd be a food drop in exchange for us. That's been talked about. Nothing. We cost them time, energy, and money. We exhausted their supplies. I mean, we ate so much. We went to places that they didn't want to go to because they were trying to hide us. And I think perhaps a bit of good fortune, being truthful at all the points to them as best you can about who we were and what we were actually doing, and just being a nice human being. Now, I know on the bigger scheme of things that still will cost your life, but I just feel at the end that they did believe who we were, got fed up with us. Everyone joked, oh, Tom, they got fed up with you and Paul talking about plants. There's an element of that. It was Christmas, goodwill gesture, a bit of luck, the guy upstairs giving us a bit of a hand too, that combination of things. But there was no political pressure, particularly in the middle of nowhere. They don't care if someone says, oh, you shouldn't be kidnapping, but we're in the Darien Gap, we can bury them. You'll never be found again, Ben. You'll never find your remains again. So there's no problem with hiding you in a pit. You'd never be found again. I do believe we touched a few heartstrings, but thank God those two at the end, Goofy and the bitch, weren't in charge. Otherwise, we would be shot. The look of pleasure of torturing us when it came to it, and then to kill it, they just couldn't wait.
Yeah, couldn't
wait to kill us.
That could be one of the titles for the film, depending on which angle they go with. Goofy and the bitch, if they want to focus on the that angle. Just very briefly, tell me a little bit about the kind of the aftermath. So, like the first time you spoke to family, when you got home, the emotions, the reception, and like obviously there was a memorial for you that was planned. Like, that's wild. Just tell me a little bit about all of that kind of. I bet it was like a roller coaster, just an absolute blizzard of emotions just that hit you in the face.
A total blizzard, yeah. So getting back to North Terminal Gatwick, I mean, was just an extraordinary experience. And to be let off the plane before anybody else, including people in first class, with my sort of cracked toes in my flip-flops. I mean, my feet were trashed from the jungle experience and just not knowing where the hell we were. It was all just a blur. And to get out of the plane. And I've always wondered, Ben, when you leave the plane, before you go on, usually you've got the walkway to go on before you get to immigration or pick your bags up. Always when you leave a plane, on the left-hand side, there's a set of stairs that are usually screened off that you walk down. I've always wanted to do that. Well, we did that day. Escort the first off the plane, apart from a couple of stewards, a couple of air hostesses. And we turned left down those steps, walked under the plane as they were pulling it up with literally the bit of wood to keep the front wheel in place, full on British Airways plane. Underneath the plane we walked. It was amazing. Into this press conference, bang, Canadian media, CNN, the local Seven Oaks Chronicle newspaper from down the road. What? And then we were like, what? My mum came to Columbia to try and find me? Really? Paul's dad flew to Panama. Parents that had never met before were brought together by these two idiots, Tom and Paul. I mean, it was just what? Mum, how do you know Paul's? Oh, good to see you, Mum. It's been 3 years. I only phoned you now 3 times from the embassy just before I left to get back home. I mean, it was just bong. There were not many tears though. It was just, as Mum says, we deserve to have you back. She said it was really sweet. But all her stories, she was shot at. She didn't go into the Darien Gap, but she ended up going all over Columbia trying to find me and get some information. I mean, she turned into an investigator. It was amazing. Paul's memorial service, there was actually a legal requirement with that to undo it or something. He had to sort of reverse the memorial service. It was bizarre. Mine was coming up, and Mum said she was due to organise it soon, but she was going to wait till the year was out before she did it. And to come back home to Lullingstone, to see the rector in the little chapel here where I live, a parish church. And I walked in there to sit down on a pew, just for a little bit of, thank you time. And the priest was in there and he turned around, saw me, went, "Aren't you Tom?" And he collapsed on the altar.
No.
Yeah, he was gone. He said, "You're walking dead. I can't deal with this." He was out. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. So Mum was like, ran into church. "Oh, sorry, Rector. Oh no, he's on the floor. So I forgot to tell him that you're not dead." Because everyone but Mum thought I was dead, basically.
Yeah.
So, and the relations turned up. It was Christmas, so coincidentally, everyone was coming around on Christmas Day, the next day, Ben, to have. It was all arranged to have, your festivities. So my aunt rang up, said, "Tom, great you're alive. It's been a few years since I've seen you. I've got to bring an extra set of cutlery, haven't I? I think because you're here." So I was like, "Sorry, yeah, extra food. I'm bringing the turkey this year, so I'll make an extra large turkey." I mean, literally, everyone was really cool about it, but it was really bizarre. And then Christmas was gone. The buzz was over, if you like, into the new year, 2001. And then just in my bed, just nightmare after nightmare. Don't remember particularly what about, but a haze of Colombian experience, I suppose. And just my bed sheets were soaked. And it was just, then that was it. 2 weeks finished and not a bad night's sleep since. You know, it was very much just a way of venting it all, I suppose.
Wow.
That kind of thing. But the biggest thing to come out of it, which I haven't touched upon, but saved my life in another way, really, especially escapism wise, psychologically wise, was building the World Garden. It was in my diary. I was starting to scribble 3 months into our captivity, just as a way of escaping the whole thing. I used to write a diary for the first 3 months in captivity, and 3 months in, they said, "You've got 5 hours, mate, before we blow your heads off." That was Scarface, the Indian chap. Wow. It was quite intense, dark times. The commandante he was a nasty chap. He captured a few of these little parakeets type thing and cut their legs off and got super glue and stuck them on bits of wood, the stubs. I mean, he was really keen to. He wanted to screw Paul, I think, and it was all quite intense, Ben. It was mad.
And they really told you at 5 hours.
Yeah, 5 hours before we blow your heads off. And I opened up my diary. It was almost, Paul was like, "Oh, bloody hell!" And we were incarcerated. The only time we really were. We weren't in the tent, so it was a big hut they built for us, divided into two, so we couldn't see or speak to each other for about 6-7 weeks. June, July, 2000. I opened up my diary with no hesitation and started to scribble out a miniature map of the world in the 2-acre wall garden here at Lullingstone, which has turned into the World Garden, showing you where plants originally come from through these amazing plant hunters and what they all brought back, and including some of my plants they brought back, all planted out in the miniature Australia, in its actual miniature shape, Asia, whatever it is, and Mexico's here as well at Lullingstone. And now 17 years on, it's really, really taking off. So it was about 3 or 4 years to get it going after I got back. And then it's now saving the place, if you like, by attracting visitors to come to where we live. Did I ever think that would happen? I mean, I didn't think I'd even do the garden in reality or survive the day, the 5 hours, you're going to die. But it just shows you how powerful plants are in horticulture. By just escaping from the situation of a horrible death, you can then draw a garden. And I never thought I'd actually do it on terra firma, but here we are, and that's my focus. So I mean, gardening's so therapeutic, and plants, and we're talking about window boxes earlier that you're going to plant up this summer and at your place, and gardening is so therapeutic. But in this case, it's more than that, Ben. Every time you go into that garden, that wouldn't exist without that experience. And it's a double therapy. It's really powerful. And talk about a mission in life. I mean, that's me set. So yeah, I wouldn't take it back a second.
That's amazing. Wow. I mean, look, I did obviously want to talk about the World Garden a bit more and about flowers and plants, but I know that you have to get going, and maybe we can do this again soon.
That'd be great. That'd be absolutely great. Yeah, absolute pleasure.
I haven't done like back-to-backs, but maybe we can kind of find a time for, say, next week or something like that, and we can kind of have one dedicated to the botany and the flowers and plants and stuff.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Yeah, be brilliant. Okay. Be absolutely brilliant.
Wicked. Well, look, I mean, this today was amazing, talking about your experiences. I haven't got the words. This was just mind-blowing stuff. Yeah, just wonderful, and I appreciate you so much. You digging into your memories and sharing it all with me. Like, what?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. And it's also so great to share the passion and to share that with people. It's why I'm alive, and I love it, as you can tell.
Yeah, definitely, I can. Everybody needs to find a passion like you have a passion for this. The world would be a better place.
Absolutely.
Before I let you go, is there anything you wanted to say to anybody watching or listening? It can be anything you want to say. It could be about the World Garden. It can be some words of wisdom, how to survive a hostage situation. Anything you want to leave our viewers and listeners with.
Whatever dreams you want to fulfill, whatever age you're at, whatever barriers are in front of you to fulfill those dreams, smash those barriers down. If you want to do it in your heart, you believe you want to do it, whatever it might be, just go and do it. No bounds, no bounds. You can do whatever you want.
Love it. Thanks so much, Tom. Take care, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you again.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Cheers, Ben. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to that conversation with the legendary Tom Hart Dyke. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, stay tuned for our next episode, again with Tom, this time about plants and his world garden. Please check out the links in the description to find out more about Tom and to get more information about said world garden, and why not check out our links while you're there. Be nice, be happy, be cool.